This podcast is owned and operated by the RCR Association, a private third party to the Department of National Defense. The content of this podcast is the responsibility of the RCR Association and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of the Government of Canada. The official emblems of the regiment are used with the permission of Regimental Headquarters, the RCR. Dave, if you want to just give us an intro about who you are and what your background is in a nutshell, essentially.
So my name's Dave Smith. I'm originally from Toronto. I joined the CAF in 2008, right after I finished university, as an infantry officer. I was in training till summer 2010, and then I got posted to 3 RCR as a platoon commander then, summer 2010. I had kind of an eccentric career, right from the beginning. So I was a platoon commander until mid 2012 or early 2012. And then what had happened was, at the time, the regiment was supposed to be sending an officer, an NCO, on the basic JTAC course every year. But just due to Afghanistan and personnel pressures and things like that, they hadn't sent anyone for a while. I think 4 or 5 years. And the chain of command at the time, on the regimental side and on the brigade side, was we need more JTACs. How are there empty spots on this course? You know what I mean? And I was the only one that ever asked. Before the CO came out and said, we are definitely sending somebody, I was a JTAC, for your listeners or viewers that aren't aware, Joint Terminal Attack Controller. It's a guy on the ground that controls airstrikes, right? And manages the airspace on behalf of the maneuver units that are walking around or driving around.
Which is a big force multiplier
huge.
for any unit.
Which is why the chain of command, the brigade commander, I forget who it was at the time, I had heard, I didn't know because I was first year captain, but just lost his mind. When he saw, they showed him here's your readiness statistics, and here's how many medics you have, and here's how many what's another brigade level, here's how many logisticians you have, and he was why is the JTAC number so low? Because this is it's the tail end of Afghanistan, but from 2005-6 until 2010, it was no commander wanted to be in Afghanistan without air support. You know what I mean? So I was told at the time, he just lost it. He was this course has to be at 100% all the time, right? And also the Royal chain of command at the time was man, we have spots on a cool course like that, and we're not sending guys. So they sent me and he was a master corporal at the time, Jay Bulger. I'm not sure where he is.
Regardless of officer or NCM, NCO, same responsibilities?
Yeah.
As a JTAC's a JTAC.
JTAC's a JTAC in the Canadian military, it is, we say it's just a qualification. So it's more than that, but
it's a capability.
It's a capability, yeah. But to be on the course, I would say being from a combat arms helps. Being artillery helps a lot, because airspace management,
right.
Thinking about the kind of 3-dimensional nature of the role, you're way more prepared for it if you come from an artillery background. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be good at it. It's just talking on the mic real fast and keeping things straight in your head and trying to remember what the ground force is trying to accomplish, where the planes are. It's a lot of safety. You know what I mean? You don't want to drop bombs in the wrong places.
Yeah.
And so it's really they send Air Force guys on it. Some of them kill it, these air traffic controllers. Some of them are amazing at it. But I honestly think it's really more personal qualities than it is background and training and stuff. But that being said, coming from an infantry background, where the force that I'm supporting, right? I know what an infantry company does. I know how it moves,
how they talk,
how fast it moves, how
they think.
Yeah. So you will be better able to support with that background.
Sometimes I look at it, it's like customer service.
Yeah,
and knowing your customer. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And often, sorry, I'm going off on all kinds of
no, it's all
here,
good.
but often you have to do things for commanders kind of against their will. You have to support them almost in spite of themselves. You know what I mean? Like a lot of them, for example, will be very cavalier about assuming responsibility for danger close strikes and things like that. They'll be like,
Can you explain what you mean by cavalier?
So they'll literally, like, you, if they want to say perform a gun strafe from a plane on a target that's like a few hundred meters away or whatever, and they're advancing, right? I might have to go to them and say, Major, sir, ma'am, you by the time you get there and the strike's all set up, it will be danger close, and that they know that requires them to approve it, right? Like we say, the commander buys the bomb, not the JTAG, and a lot of times they'll have to be like, I want the effect right at this moment, like right when we're about to cross the line of departure or whatever, and you'll have to be like, actually, you'd be much better off if everyone just got down behind cover. We'll do the strike and then go do your thing, you know what I mean? And they're like, no, I just want to do it. And it's almost like you kind of got to like do the strike in their own best interest, even if they don't understand.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And also it's just, it's so hard to explain. Even now my words are failing me because I've been out of the game so long, to explain like how artillery shoots and planes, and it pauses and planes come in to do a thing while there's helicopters resupplying stuff. It's like you don't have enough time to explain it to a company commander who's worried about a million other things. Yeah,
to me, it's like trying to explain some scientific shit to somebody, and it's like, this is not the time and place.
Yeah.
And I gotta sell it to them.
Yeah, and some commanders are like, they can just absorb massive amounts of information, but like, if you're like in the 3RCR context, because I was always supporting 3RCR, dude, if you're walking around the woods and you got night NVG on, you know what I mean, and you're worried about 120 people getting to the objective all at the right time to do the thing, the last thing you need is some nerd being like, well, sir, the risk distance or the risk estimate distance for that particular weapon, you know what I mean, is like you just, if one of the OCs was like, shut up, nerd, just do the thing, I would sympathize.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'd be like, I get it. You know what I mean? Whereas if you come from an artillery background where this is hammered into them.
Right.
I was posted to artillery for 4 years. Their guys, the brain power you have to be like a master bombardier or something on the radio is phenomenal. Like, it would just boggle your mind that, like, they sit there and study, they memorize numbers, radio discipline, fire discipline, like all this stuff. So to have an infantry guy turn around and be like, shut up, nerd, just do the thing, like, it's hard to explain each side to the other. You know what I mean? I
can kind of get it because I'm going through mortars right now. I'm basically so fire discipline.
Yeah.
And the whole concept of that, I get it.
Yeah. Actually, I was telling Leon this before. Since you brought that up, I want to shout out another awesome Royal.
Yeah.
Named Alex Haynes. He's a full colonel now, I believe, or 1-star, one or the other. He was the commandant at the infantry school when I was posted there. And I had just come from my posting as a JTAC at the artillery. And when the chief instructor, whose name escapes me right now, I forget, he was a Patricia. He's just an awesome guy too. I met him at the mess. He was a brand new chief instructor. It was like his first day. It was the first week. And we're all at the mess in Gagetown. And
do you know what year this is?
2016.
Okay.
So we're all at the mess. And he's just the new chief instructor. He's coming around. By then I'm like quite a senior captain. I was instructing on like 1.1s and 1.2s and stuff. And the new chief instructor comes around and he's just saying hi to everybody. And he's like, what's your story? And I was like, I'm that guy you probably heard about that was posted to artillery. He's like, you're that guy? Yeah, like, because he knew the posting slate, right? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, hang on a second. And he goes over and talks to Alex Haynes, who's Lieutenant Colonel Haynes at the time. And they're like, coin him here, whatever. And then they just bring me over, and the commandant, like, he looked at me. He's like, whatever job you're doing after Christmas, you're not doing it anymore. And I want a mortar course by the spring. You know what I mean? Like, by next posting season.
What do you mean?
Like, stand up a mortar cell. Like, I want infantry guys dropping rounds downrange by.
He's like, just make it for me.
Next APS. Yeah. And him and certain officers at the artillery school who were like trying to make this happen, they like pulled out all the stops, dude. I'd never seen the infantry corps like get something done against
unity of mission,
because I think Colonel Haynes knew, because we were trying so hard to bring stuff back to the pioneers, DFS.
Yeah.
There was none of that, right? So 10, 15 years ago, right, like 2010 when I was going through, it was like your options were make a career in battalion or go to CSOR, right? There's only so many recce and sniper positions, courses, and not everybody wants to be recce and snipers. If you were into demolitions, there was nothing for you.
Yeah.
Right? If you were into indirect fire and you like had the brain for calculating the how indirect fire works, there was nothing for you. There was literally nothing, right? You could be a rifleman in a rifle company, or you could be recce snipers, or you could go to CSOR, right? So I think Colonel Haynes knew if we just got one of these going, right? If we just got mortars up and running and proved like the infantry corps can do this by themselves, it would get everything else.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It would set the precedent.
Yeah, 100%. And he was right. I mean, I've been gone a while, but I think he was correct, right? Because then DFS came, pioneers came, you know what I mean? So now walking around the building, seeing you guys have like, what did you call the ATV?
The M Gator?
The Polaris, yeah. So like seeing the Polaris, we didn't have stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because I just think the bigger army didn't actually see like a need for light infantry tasks, you know what I mean? Not realizing, and I'll, not to spoiler alert or anything, but like I went and fought in Ukraine as a light infantry guy, and like I'm telling you, there's one capability you can't win war without. Drones are great, love drones. I'm terrified of them, but I love them too. But like you can win a war without drones. You can't win a war without a bunch of dudes that carry heavy stuff in the forest.
Yeah.
Like it's impossible. It's never been done. The Romans figured it out. We're still trying to figure it out.
Would you just say the idea of boots on the ground can never be replaced?
You can't.
You need a physical element on the ground.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And like every war has to like continually remind people of this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So yeah, anyway, sorry, my background story got hijacked there, but so what happened was I went and did the JTAG thing. I got posted to the school. My TOS was up. My terms of service was up in 2017. At the time, my wife and I weren't super excited about living in New Brunswick. She had taken like a $20,000 pay cut so we could move out there because her whole career was in Ottawa. And I don't want to sound like a defeatist or whatever, but once the combat mission in Afghanistan died down in 2011 or 12, whenever it was, it became really obvious to me anyways, the country didn't have a real
purpose
for the military.
Yeah.
Like, I just felt like, I was looking ahead at the guys that were like, say 5 years ahead of me. And I was like, I don't know if I want the highlight of my career to be like, I took a company to Wainwright. You know what I mean? I felt like this is very meaningless work.
And just to explain to people, because I think when you say that kind of comment, right, to me, that's like, okay, for an officer, being an OC is probably the highlight of your tactical career. Like, what are you really doing as a battalion commander tactically, like, unless you're deploying a battalion?
I will say, infantry officer is it's a weird segment of society. They're my people. Everything I just said sounded negative. I don't want to make it sound like I'm slagging dudes that made different choices than I did. Is Lieutenant Colonel Shepard still a...
No.
He gone? Who is it now?
Right now? Yeah. It's Ben Rogerson.
Oh, real? Okay, so he was my instructor on Phase 4.
Okay,
captain.
Shout out.
And that guy actually had... I don't know if you've heard about... his early career.
Nah, spill the beans.
Oh no, dude, he was a rock star in Afghanistan when it was like real war, and then he was a rock star instructor too. Like at the school, like even when.
So he was a platoon commander overseas.
Yeah.
Do you know what year?
2 RCR. It was so he was my instructor, I think, in 2009. So it was prior to that. It was like probably 2007, 7, 8.
Okay.
9. And it was just clear, like, he was one of those dudes that was going to go far. But he's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about more people that came in, like 5 years after him. You know what I mean? Who it's like they got in, and, dude, going to Wainwright as a company commander might be your career highlight. That might be the coolest. Or going to Latvia to do Wainwright in Latvia, that might be the sexiest thing you ever...
Yeah.
Right? And I'm not knocking anyone for making that decision. Like, we need people to do that. And I know what it's like to be in a country that didn't have a standing military and got invaded. You know what I mean? So we definitely need those people. But I was like, I don't know if this is for me. And as you can probably tell from my story thus far, like, I had a bit of career ADHD. You know what I mean? It's a bit like squirrel syndrome. They're like, they dangle this JTAG thing in front of me, and I was like, no, like a cat, hitting a ball. And then, when I was at the school, I was just like a normal instructor for like 6 months before they're like, you want to stand up your own cell and learn how to do mortars? I was like, yes, I want to do that too. And then my wife and I, we couldn't get a doctor. We couldn't, we just really, and we could see the writings were on the wall. Like, if I didn't make the decision when my TOS was up, we were probably going to be in New Brunswick for a long time, like probably 2 posting. And so I just chose I was like, I'll chance it in the reserves. I'll switch over to reserves and be like a full-timer. And that way we can move to Ottawa. She can have her, her career. And I will be kind of freed up to, have a bit more control over my military career and still have a military career. Even though it wouldn't be in the regiment doing kind of that normal track of, like, you do your officer ticks in the box, and you get your career courses, and then get a company, and then if you're good, you go on staff college. And I knew I was giving all that up, but at the time, I would say it was like that didn't look super appealing. You know what I mean? So then I switched to the P-Res, and I was one of those, because you were a reservist before, I think you said, yeah. So I was one of those horrible reservists that came from the Reg Force who had no idea how the reserves works. You know what I mean? So the poor unit that hired me, the Prince Edward and Hastings Regiment, like, I don't think I ever paraded with them. And their clerks were great. They were very kind to me. But I was like, I live in Ottawa, and they still signed me up to their cap badge, so I was like trying to figure out how to navigate the reserve system. And that's when I realized, like, man, everything's broken. Like, it's not just my time in the Reg Force where I was like, why is everything so stupid right now? Like, I got in the reserves, I was like, whoa, it can get even worse.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And so I ended up working at CJOC. I got hired to one job, and then they ended up putting me in something else. So I get there, and I'm in uniform, and the guy who hired me was an artillery major at the time, lieutenant colonel now, I think. Actually, I think he's retired now, last time I saw him, named Eric Deneau. He was a great dude. The day before, and I had been talking to him, like, I was transitioning out of the Reg Force, transitioned into the reserves, got hired to this Class B job by him. The day before I was supposed to start working for him, his son got in a massive car accident, like brutal. Like, I think he was in the hospital for months or whatever. So I wake up, it's Monday morning, I'm going to start my whole new life and everything. My wife and I have moved into a new apartment in downtown Ottawa and everything. And I'm psychologically adjusting what's going on. I can't get a hold of him. So I just drive to the building. I'm in uniform. And I just walk up to the commissioner. Like, hey, I'm starting work here today. And they're like, okay, here's your pass. Guy just hands me a pass.
That's jokes.
Yeah. And I'm like, because I knew the targeting shop was in at the time fell under the J3 under ops. So I was like, what floor is ops on? He's like, oh, 3rd floor. So I just walk in, got on an elevator with a bunch of people, and all the doors are locked. Like, you need a key card to get through all of them, which I don't have. You know what I mean? And I see somebody of lower rank than, lieutenant colonel or whatever. And I'm like, hey, where's the targeting shop? And they're like, oh, it's right over there. So I walk over, and there's this guy. He's his name's Reggie. He's from Montreal. He is a reservist, but in that job at the time, he was a civilian. He's worked there for like ever. Really, like, out there, flamboyant guy. And I walk over, I'm like, excuse me, is this targeting? And he's like, yes. And I'm like, is Major Deneau around? And he's like, who are you? And I was like, I'm supposed to start working here today. And he's like, blah, 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 blah. And like, he had no idea that there was a new guy showing up or whatever. So we walk back to that woman, Lynn's desk. She's the executive assistant to the J3 himself, the colonel, now General Laforet, Eric Laforet, another guy, huge shout out, Eric Laforet. He might be a 2-star by now. I hope he is. So they start yelling at each other in French, and then the deputy comes out. He's a pilot, a lieutenant colonel. I can't remember his name, but he was funny too. They're all screaming at each other in French about something, because I guess reservists in Ottawa are just a pain in the ass. And so I'm like, oh man, what have I got myself into here? So Lynn just turns to me, she's like, all right, follow me. So they bring me to a cubicle, and they're like, sit here. And like 2 hours later, I was in a planning group meeting we were getting ready to do the security for the G7 summit. In 2018, the G7 summit in Quebec, and the Donald was coming and everything. So they were like, well, you can be the G7 guy. I'm like a reservist captain. I go to a meeting like the J5's planning. They're like asking me questions like, man, it's that easy to get a job here? You know what I mean? And so I that's just how I ended up in this. Like, I short circuited the system, right? I was now doing like a mid-level majors, post command majors job, as a reservist captain that just moved to Ottawa. I didn't have AOC or nothing at the time. So I kind of like learned like how Ottawa works before I otherwise would have. If I had just stayed in the regimental system, right, I'd be like 5 or 6 years out from a job like that at least. You know what I mean? And now here I was doing it, and I got on AOC that year, so I was doing AOC while I was doing that job. And
is that just because that's just how the reserves are, right? Like, you just look for opportunities that are opened. Yeah, and you apply and you can get them.
I felt horrible because I didn't understand whatever the three French people screaming at each other, whatever their decision making process was. They had undercut Major Deneau at the time, right? Like I did, like when I interviewed with him. I said, I'll come to your shop, I'll work for you. And then he was in the office when this all went down. But anyways, eventually I did meet him. And if he had wanted to, he could have been like, whoa, this is my reservist. I hired him. You know what I mean?
Right. Right. He could have eased the tension.
He 100% could have put his finger on the scale.
Because everyone's defensive right now.
Yeah. Right? But then I was so happy to have a job. Yeah. Right. And like afford rent and stuff. And my wife was busy. Like we weren't sure how quickly she was going to find a job again and stuff. So I was just so happy to be contributing and doing stuff, and it looked like there was a demand signal for me that I just started working. And he did when he came back. I finally met him. Like he was on compassionate leave, I think, for about 2 weeks, and he came back and he just came to my cubicle and he's like, "Look, man, like I'm sorry this all went down or whatever, but like, are you happy? Like if you're doing like." If you're happy here and you're doing the thing, and I was working for J3 North America, I had a cool job title too. I was the Continental Defense Officer.
Oh shit!
Which sounds pretty. I mean, I enjoy putting that.
Fuck man, that's way better than my job titles.
I know, yeah, reservist captain snuck into the building. They're like, "We'll make you the Continental Defense Officer." So I'm like working with NORAD and shit. Dude, it was hilarious. Yeah. So I was like, "Sir, I'm happy. Like I'm happy doing what I'm doing, but I do feel bad that like you got." Snaked a reservist or whatever." He's like, no, because he hired a lot of reservists. Is one of the reasons that he was quite kind of well known in the reserve world. Like if you wanted a real job, definitely talk to this guy, because he was very good at making sure the system didn't take advantage of you and you didn't just get pushed around by the forces that were just pushing me around. You know what I mean? So he was like, no, I'm just I hired you. I'm glad you're on contract now. And if you're doing a job that obviously the system needs somebody doing, and you want to be doing it, then I'm not gonna throw a flag on the play or whatever, right? So I always respected him for that, even though I never ended up working for him. And yeah, so I did that for like a year and a half or whatever, and then I really wanted to deploy because I hadn't deployed at that point. And Colonel Laforet at the time, who was the J3, I got on his radar real quick because he's a Vendu. And he was like super, because there's not a lot of like an infantry captain on his ops floor was weird, right? Like there's like the lowest ranking person typically was major, lieutenant commander. So he definitely, I remember because he started the same week I started, and I remember standing at the photocopier one day, waiting for something to print or whatever, and he just came in and he's like, "Who are you?" And I was like, "I'm Captain Spitzer. I work for you." And he's like, "Oh. Didn't know I had any captains." And it's like, okay. So he goes back to his office, and then over the months, he started to figure out who I was. And there was a huge disaster relief mission that came up real quick in Quebec somewhere, one of the islands off in the St. Lawrence somewhere. And it happened, I could tell it was because in J3 North America, we spent a lot of time worrying about like Oplentis and flooding, forest fires, all that stuff. So we coordinate like the Rangers, the reserve units that fill sandbags, if you need helicopters or. And so we had done quite a few of these during the first year that I was there. And I could tell one was brewing. I forget why, but there was some sort of weather system moving in. And I was like, something is going to happen.
Right.
I'm sure of it. And so I was sitting at my desk, like literally starting to type up an op order because I knew something was going to happen. And sure enough, at like 4 o'clock, everyone starts going home or whatever. And I remember one of my coworkers at the time was like, dude, you going to the gym or something? I was like, nah. Like our lieutenant colonel at the time was also a Vendu, Robin Lassard, had got called to a meeting. I was like, I suspect something's coming our way. You know what I mean? So I start typing up an op order, and all hell broke loose. There was like the provincial government requested all kinds of assistance because the power went out on this Ile de Madeleine, which is like an island that had a hospital on it. So the power went out. We knew they were requesting airlifts and all kinds of stuff. And I was just like, Infantry Dave, AOC qualified, knew how to type an op order, whatever. I knew how to call everyone for a quick meeting to discuss all this stuff. And Colonel Laforet at the time was watching this, and I remember this clear as day. He brings me to the general's office to sign the op order, and it's now like 9 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock at night or something. And the general also looked at me. I'd been working there for like well over a year at this point. The general looks at me like standing there with this op order. He's like, "Who are you?" And Colonel Laforet is like, "This is Dave Smith, sir. He's my best captain."
Oh,
yeah!
Shout out!
Yeah, no, but I was his only captain. Yeah, I was the only captain that worked for him.
This is my best captain.
So he simultaneously like paid a compliment to me to the general, but then insulted me like back. You know what I mean? And I was like, well played, Colonel, well done. And so then he knew I wanted a deployment, and he's like, okay. So he just goes back to his office. And then the next day when I came into work, there was a like CFTPO for me to deploy as a major to South Sudan.
Like right after you're done?
Yeah, well, it turned out it wasn't right after I was done, but they needed to fill the CFTPO. Because I think I finished the course in like July or whatever. And then I was supposed to deploy that fall, but it got delayed due to UN reasons and all kinds of other stuff. But yeah, it was like, you're going to go finish AOC. Boom, we're putting a major crown on you, and you're going and you're deploying.
Did you just show up one day and you see it in your modern mass?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. He knew, like, I had been asking, like, every new boss that I had, whenever, I had my meeting, my first interview with them, I was like, want a deployment? Like, I've been in 9 years, 10 years. I haven't deployed yet. This is killing me. So like I had been asking, he knew that I wanted to go.
Right.
But I would have taken, it could have been like, go
wherever.
Go be the IMO for, and I would have been gung ho for it.
Yeah.
So then I went to South Sudan as a military liaison officer. And,
for the UN?
Oh, also, yeah, for the UN. Also, another thing to plug, it's mostly officers that go on those missions. But I will say, if anyone can do it, do the UN course at PSTC, Kingston. It is one of the best trainings that I ever did in the Army, in the Canadian Armed Forces, and prepared me immensely for Ukraine. Because
interesting.
It's all about, like, you do, like the stuff that really, when I went to real war, the stuff that really benefited me, I learned on that UN course, actually, which Mark Shepard was on with me. Because he, I forget which sector of South Sudan it was, but we deployed at roughly this. I deployed off cycle, but we were there at the same time. And you do like hostile negotiations, you do like low level investigation stuff. You do like, if you walk up to a hut and like a 16-year-old with a rifle comes out pointing at you, screaming at you, or like, what do you do?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And the Peace Support Training Center in Kingston runs this. It's a UN course. Like, there's a whole bunch of UN instructors there, but you can just tell whoever was in charge of that cell at PSTC ran, like, dude, we had, I think, like 30 augmentees that spoke Serbo-Croat.
Yeah.
So, like, you know what I mean? Like, you get out of the truck and you're going to, like, you think you're just going on exercise, and like someone's going to come out speaking French to you, like it's Wainwright or whatever, and like all of the villagers and actors and everybody, they're all speaking Serbo-Croatian, so you're like way off. You're on the back foot, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you don't know, like when you're talking to them, like some of the actors are really good. Like you don't know, like, can I trust this person? Can't I trust this person? Are they exploiting me, or are they gonna, you know what I mean? Like, what do they want out of the UN? You know what I mean? And dude, when I was in South Sudan, but also when I was in Ukraine, that's how every conversation was all the time. You know what I mean? Like you don't, like when we go into,
you weren't sure, like it wasn't like some easy
script.
script.
A town that's been liberated, right? You don't know who was collaborating with the Russians. You know what I mean? Like when we went into like Kupiansk and Izum and these places, like these people lived under occupation. Like, yeah, they were victims, but they might not have been victims. You know what I mean? So learning all that stuff on the UN course, like I can't express enough like how well it served me. And when I was in South Sudan, like when I got there, honestly, other than the fact that they're all South Sudanese and speaking Sudanese Arabic, it was exactly like being on the PSTC course. You know what I mean? And we did mass casualty training, which definitely helped in Ukraine. We did conduct after capture, which it's good for, I'm glad I didn't have to use it, but it's definitely good for the confidence. You know what I mean? So that course was dope. So then, you know, that spring 2019, I deployed to South Sudan. And it's easy to shit all over the UN, like people do. But I really felt, and I hope the people that I was deployed with would agree with me, like, I really got the impression, like, it is what you make of it. But, like, my first patrol, man, I was out negotiating with, like, the child soldier, really, but, like, a warlord, essentially, to just help the UN people get these kids back that had been abducted from this village. So it was my first patrol. You know what I mean? Like, we drove out into the woods, and the whole town, the whole village was there. The chief was yelling. There's women crying or whatever. And I turned to like the South Sudanese like interpreter that I have. I was like, what's going on? He's like, 6 of their kids got abducted in a cattle raid. And the human rights investigators are like frantically writing stuff down and trying to appease the people or whatever. And I just turned to the interpreter. I was like, where do you think these kids are? And he's like, they're probably at the cattle camp that's like 5K down the river. And I was like, well, can we just go ask for them back? And the dude like looked at me stunned. You know what I mean? I can still see his face right now. He was like, what do you mean? I was like, well, I mean, we had a Rwandan infantry battalion for our force protection. So like, we got the UN police. You have all the force protection you need. Like the human rights investigators can just grab one of these villagers. We'll put them in a truck and we'll just drive down there and you can ask for them back. You know what I mean? So we did that. Right? Well, they did that. I mean, I just helped coordinate the security or whatever. But like the human rights investigators went in. And it was like, dude, it was like they told us on course, like a 16-year-old with no shoes on and a rusty AK came out and he was the commander. You know what I mean? And the South Sudanese guy started talking to him and the interpreter came back and he said, yeah, there's kids here. When they stole the cattle, they didn't want the kids to run back and tell their fathers. So they took the kids, but they don't want the kids. You know what I mean? So like, as long as we're not here to start any like police actions against them or whatever, they'll just give them back. So the human rights investigators just walked in and came out with 6 kids and we threw them in a truck and took them back to their village, you know what I mean? And just gave them back to their families and stuff. And I was like, I've been here like, at that point, I'd probably been there like 2-3 weeks because there's like in-dog and stuff. But like, I've been on the mission for like 10 minutes, you know what I mean? And I was like, listening to how much other people would complain about their UN experiences or whatever. It's like, I don't know, man. I think it's really what you make of it.
Yeah.
I was like,
this peacekeeping stuff is pretty easy.
Yeah.
You know?
I was like, I don't see what the big deal is.
Yeah.
And then the rest of because I was there for like just over 8 months.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it's like, you know, I found my value added was because the government sides, the UN sides with the government, right? So all of that, we call them the IOs, the in opposition, but they're like the rebel forces. They desperately want to get their side of the story to the UN, right? So I actually never really felt unsafe in South Sudan, partly being like a white guy in a foreign nation's military uniform. It gives you kind of a, rightly or wrongly, gives you a sense of security. But
like it separates you from the belligerents.
Yeah, and also like they're not going to come after you, right? Like even the criminals, because crime, the real problem there is that the Civil War creates this like lawless sort of kind of Wild West mentality. So it's just, there's bandits on every road. You know what I mean?
Man, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's fucking
So
crazy.
when we're rolling around with the Rwandans, and they have armored vehicles and we have troops and stuff, like the bandits aren't going to mess with us. They don't want to shoot a UN military or a UN civilian member. So the sense of invincibility, it's not total, but it is kind of present. You know what I mean? Whereas like the female UN worker, like the civilians that work there, like they were always worried about being outside the camp and where
Their general safety.
Their general safety.
Yeah.
And I totally understand. I was like, yeah, totally. I understand why you have to take this way more seriously than I do, you know? Really, our only strategic interest should be alliance management at all times. Like, what do? We help the alliance because we can't defend ourselves. You know what I mean? So we have to be good alliance partners. And the thing that we are good at doing is training, right? Like I met many Ukrainians who told me like, yeah, dude, Canada came and trained me, you know, in like 2015, 2016, 2017. I did my 2 years or whatever of service. And then I went back to my life. And then when the invasion started, I just drove out east, like strapped onto whatever unit was about to start fighting. And I knew what I was doing. You know what I mean? I was doing section attacks, but using anti-tank weapons, you know?
And the way
a lot of them will sorry to interrupt, but a lot of them tell you, like, we survived because the other countries came and trained us, showed us how to do this, you know what I mean? And like the peace support training set, that is their mandate. You know what I mean? And I think they're kind of treated like the Army's like forgotten stepchild, you know?
Like they're not important, or something.
Like it's just if you tell people, "Oh, I'm going on a course at PSTC," no one's like, "Ooh."
Right, like the same admiration costs you would get, like the Advanced Warfare Center,
and I can't tell you, that like training is a strategic level asset, right? To be able to go show another nation that's struggling with like security sector reform and building
100%
military, they need help. You know what I mean? And it's stuff, you know, the Ukrainians they've crammed a generation's worth of reforming their military into 8 years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And not only did they reform their military, but they instituted an entire national resilience campaign, if you will, to convince their citizens, like, don't roll over and take it. You know what I mean? Like when the invaders show up, do not give in. Don't preemptively give in. You know what I mean? And so those videos that were coming out on social media in like February of 2022 of like old ladies trash talking Russian soldiers and stuff, that was a deliberate effort, right? Like the Ukrainians, like the SSO went around and trained people to do stuff like that. You know what I mean? And the confidence boost that they get when you show, you know, like I was in a Belarusian regiment, you know, they were like, they really, really wanted to professionalize. They're all dissidents and defectors from Belarus after the failed revolution in 2020. You know, I would show them basic mission planning. Like I'm talking the entry level stuff.
Like small party task, man.
Yeah. Like even how to craft a mission statement. Like how to write, like how a mission statement's like pro forma, you know?
Yeah, smask and shit.
Exactly. Yeah. How, 5-paragraph order. Big one was control measures, right? Like, so how to use phase lines, how to use assembly area, how to mark these things on the map, and how to designate rendezvous and shit like that. You show that stuff to people that know they have to go fight war. Like, dude, they internalize it immediately and then turn around and explain it in Russian or Ukrainian or Belarusian to everyone else. You know what I mean? So like training is really a thing that like Canada, I think we treat it as like a fallback because we don't have any F-18s to send. So what can we do? Oh, we can do training.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We'll go train the Latvians or we'll go train the Afghans or whoever. And it feels like it's like the like fallback strategic donation. You know what I mean? Whereas we really shouldn't be thinking of it that way.
Yeah.
You know?
How I would, there's so much that was said actually just now, but
go.
Like just to backtrack of what was just said, how I articulate it is like, you know, what I see our job doing majority of the time, our job is to just be ready.
Yeah.
And so in order to achieve that, it requires so much training.
Yes. Yeah.
And in order to be good at, or in order to reach that end state of being ready, or at least as ready as possible, for the time you actually deploy overseas, we need to have a very organized, structured way of approaching what we want to achieve, right? And deliberately hitting everything and doing the best we can to try to consolidate all of our objectives together, so we can confirm like these big grand operational capabilities.
Yeah.
I'm blabbing a lot right now.
No, dude, sing it, brother.
But where I'm going with this is, you know, your experiences are very different from my experience with the Ukrainians, where my operational deployment with them was in a very safe location.
Oh, were you in JTAG?
I was op unifier in the United Kingdom training.
Okay, yeah.
So I was in England.
Yep.
And so, you know, my experiences over there, very safe area. We're getting like these rotations of students coming in. And, you know, my program was specifically focused at in the instructor courses.
Okay.
So we're essentially teaching them like, EL, ISK, NATO.
Yeah.
And that was amazing. And my takeaway from that was like, oh, I see their deficit is that they don't have like really standardized training.
No.
And
doctrine. They don't have doctrine. That's a huge...
Because I'll get these guys from... You can call them all the same National Guard, or they're all from the police, or they're all from border guards. Those are the three I dealt with the most. Yep. And east, west, north of the country, wherever you're from, everybody had something different to go about it, depending on how your brigade went about it.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, there's no standardization, which Canada really has... I'm not saying we're perfect. Canada is not perfect at standardization, but we are way well ahead of them.
Yeah. So... You're actually hitting on something like super important. Before I start pontificating, so I just want to tell you a story that'll like make you feel kind of good. When before my last rotation before I came home was in Kharkiv, and before we did that one last spring, we did a month and a half of pre-deployment training, and their sapper training was dope. It was this Ukrainian sergeant, is a big, tall dude. He didn't speak a lick of English, but he was awesome. He was teaching with his Canadian aide memoir in one hand and his Canadian FMP in the other.
No way.
I'm not joking, dude. Yeah. And when at the end of the week, and it was awesome. We got to do all kinds of cool combat engineer training that I'd never done before.
Chimo.
Yeah, 100%. And so I had a little like Canadian Ukrainian hand, and I brought it to him, and I shook hands with him. I said "Pracujemy razom," which means we work together. And one of my colleagues that was there helping translate, I just said like, dude, like that training, I was in the Canadian Army for 15 years. I didn't get to do anything that thorough or detailed or whatever. And he literally said like, the Canadians taught me that. You know what I mean? So that training mission, like, trust me, it's, I'm now granted this guy did it.
Yeah.
Clearly he had done it before the UK mission stood up. He was more like a senior NCO, but at some point we sent combat engineers to Ukraine who probably trained him in like Lviv or somewhere. Yeah. You know what I mean? And he had gone to the front, fought the whole first 2 years of the war. And now he had his like vacation posting at the training institution showing me and the other guys how to use, blow up mines, defuse stuff. You know what I mean?
It was so crazy. Like, I can't help but want to share like the idea that I had students that have been in so much combat.
Yeah.
Like more combat than probably like people I knew in my experiences. And I was there and I was able to give them a good experience of being a student from a guy like me because I spent so much of my career just teaching.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm like, listen, you know, all of these experiences, which is amazing. It makes you an excellent applicator of the skill, but now you got to teach this skill to 10 other dudes. And I'm going to show you how to do it. And you got 40 minutes. So we have this game of constraints. So you got 40 minutes, Sergey, or like, you know what I mean? To show this guy how to do this thing.
Explain, demonstrate, imitate.
Right. And in the beginning, you see this guy and they struggle because they have so much knowledge, but they don't know how to condense, articulate it. And into like a thing where in 40 minutes they can get their point across, get a repetition in or a couple of repetitions in, and be able to give feedback and then get ready to be able to contribute to the next lesson and build on it. And I was so happy that my guys had a good experience with me, where I'm like, fuck, man, it felt good to contribute for a guy who's never been to war.
Also, I would say there's two things about the kind of the pitfalls of having a lot of combat experience. Those who don't have it, I think, wrongly assume that they don't have something to offer because they don't have that combat experience, which is just flat out not true, as you're saying. And then you definitely do meet people that like they got their feet wet, like they maybe did get into a gunfight or two, and they did survive some artillery barrages, and they think that means they know everything about war. It's like, I'll tell you about national strategic interests because I was in a trench once that got mortared. It's like those two things are completely unrelated, you know? So yeah, the I would definitely say the people that you meet that have more and more combat experience that have survived a long time, they're actually the ones that like appreciate training the most. You know what I mean? Like they're looking at it going like, man, I wish I had known that for the last year that I was fighting. You know what I mean? Or I wish we had this kind of standardized approach to room clearing or whatever it is, you know? It's sort of the people that got like, you know, 10 minutes of a fight and that think they know everything. They're like, how are you going to teach me anything? You don't have combat experience. Whereas you meet like the guys, I worked with a lot of guys that have been fighting since 2014. You know what I mean? Belarusians and Ukrainians. And they were the ones that listened to anything I had to say. Like they were the ones that I'd get called to some commander's trench to be like, hey, we're thinking about making this decision regarding the mission, and we just want to hear what you think before we make the final call. You know what I mean? Whereas like to them, I'm just literally a rifleman. You know what I mean? But they're like, they know I'm a former NATO officer. So before they make a decision, you know, whether to abort a mission or something, or whether to, you know, we thought we were doing a static defense, but we don't think there's any Russians in the positions in front of us, so we're gonna advance forward, and they're making that call on the ground. Before they would make that call, they'd literally ask people with experience, you know. And these guys, like, it's my first week there, well, not my first week, but say it's my first real rotation in Ukraine. They've been fighting since 2014, and they're asking me what I think. You know what I mean? It's those guys that have like lots of experience that are actually the ones who are like, I know that I can learn something from you, right? The like 22, 23-year-old that like he's just been I have more surgeries than he has weeks in the army. You know, they're the ones that are like, how would you know? You've never been to war.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
They're the ones who don't appreciate humility and are susceptible of like ego tripping.
Yeah. The good thing about real war though is they die.
Yeah.
Like those are the guys that get killed. You know, if you're reckless, you don't last long. You know what I mean? And the people that don't have enough judgment from training and development and professional education, they don't have that judgment. They're the ones who confuse recklessness for bravery, right? Which is a very rookie mistake. And you can tell too, because you meet some of these Ukrainian dudes that are like well into their 50s fighting, who have been fighting for 10 years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you can tell, like they have the judgment. You know what I mean? That's why Azov is still around. You know what I mean? That's why 3rd Assault Brigade, who I was attached to, like they are a premier unit because their dudes, like they have a high casualty tolerance. Let me tell you, like they learn their lessons the hard way. But like the ones that survive, they're like, actually, if there's a fucking Canadian Army officer here, like bring him to the O group too. You know what I mean? I forgot what my original point was before I told my combat engineer story, but just to go back to what you were saying about training, I think that because the Canadian Army is so hard on itself with training, it's at least a skill set that never disappears. You know what I mean? So like you, Liam, you guys are like, I don't know how far you're into your military careers or whatever, but by the time you're 5-6 years in, you have more training as like, say, Canadian Master Corporal, that's like 25, right? Probably has more professional military training than 95% of soldiers around the world will ever have. You know what I mean? So when just the fact that you've been sent on a leadership course where you learned how to instruct a class, that makes you like potentially a strategic asset that is in short supply globally. You know what I mean? And we don't think of it that way. We just think you're going on another IT course, individual training course, right? Like you just think, oh, great, I just did, basic mountain ops, and then I did PLQ, and then I had 2 weeks of leave, and now we're doing a summer exercise, and then I'm going on some other fucking IT course. You know what I mean? Because like I don't know why the Army in particular has just been strangled by IT.
Yeah.
Right? Like how often you show up for company parades in the morning, whatever, and you look around, you're like, why are there like 12 dudes here?
Yeah, everyone's
you know what I mean? Like everyone's on course all the time, you know? Which is partially the byproduct of like the government doesn't give us real tasks to go do stuff, so we just train ourselves into oblivion. But the flip side of that is like, you know, you're an incredibly professionalized soldier at a very early stage in your career, which, you know, is not the norm, you know. It's not the norm anywhere other than really, you know, the Five Eyes countries and some of the NATO countries, some of the bigger European NATO countries. But it's not the norm globally. It's definitely not the norm in Eastern Europe. You know what I mean? Like it's just not, you know.
Dave, I do want to like continue with the story of like, so you went from.
Sorry, I know I'm just.
No, it's all good, man.
Off here.
You went from working.
Good luck with the editing.
You went with working at CJOC as a reservist to. How did you get involved with the war?
So what happened was I came back from that deployment, and I had because I had a bunch of leave stored up. I was on leave for like a couple of months, and then I didn't know what my next class.
Sorry, what year were you on deployment?
So it was 2019 was I was deployed. I got home right before Christmas.
Okay,
and then so it was early 2020.
So before like COVID lockdown,
just before. So what happened was I didn't have a hard position because like when you're on, so you when you deploy, you go on Class C, like you're Class C reservist. So I technically didn't have to go back to that job at CJOC, and I wasn't dying to. You know, I'd done it like a year and a half. I also felt like I was way up in the stratosphere of the Ivory. I was like briefing generals and writing op orders. You know what I mean? Like I was just way high up there in the Ottawa world. And then the province, when they came out of lockdown, the army wanted to catch up on all this training that they had missed. You know what I mean? So they sent as many people as they could to Meaford to like try and pump people through IT.
Catch up on fourth generation, yeah.
So I went at this point. You know, I like deployed as a major, came back. They had fucked up the administration, so I didn't get substantively promoted. Yeah. So then COVID happened. Even though I'm like an OC at the time, they're like, by the way, you're not a major. And I was like, okay.
Yo, it's just how it is with ranks sometimes, though.
So I go, so they're like, you're not a major, you're a captain. I'm like, but I'm an OC. And whoever is like, okay, we'll work on it. In the meantime, can you go to Meaford and run DP1s? So I'm like a captain 10 or whatever at this point. I'd been functionally a major for over 2 years and deployed as a major. And I'm teaching DP1s in Meaford. And Meaford was not prepared for that because it was like, I don't know what it was like in Petawawa, but I know in Meaford, man, like the army was trying to run courses, but like range control, the kitchen staff, the accommodations people, the commissionaires, the medical, like they were still treating it like it was lockdown. And no matter how much I don't know if you call him the commandant, but like the lieutenant colonel that runs the Meaford training center.
Yeah.
No matter how much he told people, like, no, we're running training, like get back to work. You know what I mean? So, you know, I go to Meaford teaching courses or at the time. That's when cyber. I had a friend that was working at cyber. She's an armored officer. Another person I'll shout out, Jessica F. Belanger. I had known her from doing my ops job at CJOC, and I was sort of always kind of like, full disclosure, I'm a bit of a nerd. And I was like, cyber, that sounds fucking like my next squirrel syndrome thing. I was thinking this before I deployed. So when Op Laser was coming to an end and I was finally going to have to make a decision about what my next job was going to be. I just emailed her and I was like, hey, do you think cyber would hire? Cause she's an armored officer. She's the only like kind of person from a combat arms background that I had met that ever did anything with cyber. So I emailed her, and it was literally just by choice. Like I think she had her master's in cybersecurity, and that was like her thing. She was just really into it, and that's what she wanted to go do. So she requested and ended up there. So I emailed her, and I was like, hey, do you think they would take like an AOC qualified infantry officer for something? Like I can be something. And she's like, yes, we desperately need an ops officer. So I went to go be the operations officer at cyber at the like at CJOC. So there's like a component cell or whatever. The same way like Army, Navy, Air Force has like a guy or a team really at CJOC that helps coordinate the Army's support to operations. Cyber had the same thing. So I went to go be the OFSO there. And that's when I started working with Ukraine, right? Because the Rick Dick story about, you know, in Ukraine and cyber support and all this stuff, that's like I hit the ground running doing that. And because I had sort of I'd really been paying attention to Joint Task Force, JTFU, Joint Task Force, Ukraine Unifier, how that whole mission was good. Because when I was in J3, right, like every morning we get updated on all the ops that are going on. So I was well aware of like what was happening in Latvia, what was happening in Ukraine, how the missions were developing, and I just hit the ground running. I was like, I don't know how to cyber yet, but I promise I'll learn. But what I do know how to do is make con ops and get guys deployed, you know what I mean? And get missions like running. Like I know how to do that. And that's what cyber needed, right? And once cyber had like, me doing that stuff, which is more like the CJOC side of the work, and Rick Dick supporting us, it was like suddenly it got huge real fast. Like I was only there maybe like 6 months or whatever, and it was like now we had like a full-time standing task for cyber to the mission, right? It was not like a bespoke little thing. It was like, no, they're doing this, and I'm sure it's developed considerably since I left, because they have they kind of they owned it. Like they wanted to make this, like, this is our thing. We're doing this. You know what I mean? So I was doing that for about a year, and then targeting wanted somebody like cyber fluent in targeting, which is a cell. It's a directorate in CJOC. And I worked with them very closely. A good friend of mine, an artillery officer named Lee Belmore, got posted in there. And I was working with them a lot, and they were like, they really, like, they loved that cyber was doing stuff for JTFU. And they wanted to start making, we would take out like the like strategic level objectives for Ukraine. Like, here's what Ukraine needs and wants. Here's what Canada has committed to supporting. How can we like target these? Like, how can we make them meet up? You know what I mean? And start knocking off mission tasks, And so I slid over to targeting as just like a targeting officer there, but like cyber was sort of my kind of niche. But then once I was on that, like now my full-time job was supporting Ukraine and Latvia. And, in 2020, while I was getting into this world, there was this huge failed revolution in Belarus that no one was paying attention to because it was the middle of COVID. But like, if you had the job that I had, we were paying like super close attention. You know what I mean? This is a big, big, big deal, right? So then that was summer, fall of 2020, and then spring of 2021 is when the buildup started, April 2021. And I could kind of see the writings on the wall, and there was a lot of personal reasons too, but like things weren't really working out with the cyber or chain of command for me as a reservist. You know what I mean? It was just like my admin was falling apart. They weren't getting me promoted. It was just like they were struggling just to be a component, let alone how the hell do we administer reservists and stuff, you know what I mean? So I slid over to targeting in CJOC. Another person I'm going to shout out is a woman named Dawn Porter. She's in charge of all reservist administration for all of CJOC, not just like CJOC headquarters, but all the the regional joint task force and the joint operational support group and all that stuff. I knew that if I took this job at targeting, even though it's in the same building, I just went up one floor, my administration would now be back under her watchful eye. And that was enough to convince me, like, I need a Class B, like I need full-time employment. I got to know that I have job security. I need to get promoted for all sorts of reasons. I need to move over to targeting. So I did. And then all that stuff going on in Eastern Europe that I was like paying attention to as like one part of my job became my whole job, right? And I was talking to people in Ukraine every day. And it was broader in scope as well, right? It wasn't just like, how can we do cyber support? It was like, how can we take a big picture Canadian strategic support to Ukraine? And how can we think like more holistically that way? And that's why I started working like super closely with dudes like Rick Dick and the other policy advisors. And it happened quick, but I would say in like less than a year, I got a really, really thorough education in the level where the military and the government meet, right? So if you've ever read, for reading lists, any nerds that are out there watching this, One book everyone should at least cursory glance through because it's huge is called The Soldier and the State by Samuel Huntington. Liam, you're a nerd, so write that one down. The Soldier and the State by Samuel Huntington. Everyone, especially officers, but really everyone that thinks of themselves as a career professional soldier needs to at least read like the first 100 pages of that book, because it's not as clear as you think, right? The relationship between the military and the government is not as clear as we like to think. The military, I think, is often brainwashed and brainwashes itself into thinking they're not political. Like, they don't need to understand the politics of the war that they're fighting in or the tasks that they've been given. You just got to go to Mali and do medical fucking evacuations or whatever. Like, you don't need to worry about why you ended up there. You know what I mean? And that's absolutely not true. Like, this is just, it's not true, and it's irresponsible to think that way. And I learned that real quick in 2021.
Why?
Because I was watching totalitarianism fucking advance on democracy. The war starts that first weekend. I remember, so it started on a Thursday. Everybody was like pulling their hair. We went into work the next day. Like, dude, literally, my friend Cody, who's also a policy advisor, we were texting each other that night. Like we were literally watching on Twitter and on just social media generally, Telegram and shit. We're like, oh, there they went. There's. I remember he sent me a text at like 8:30 at night, which means it's like 3:30 in the morning Ukraine time, right? He's like, oh, they went now. And it's like, here's a video of the Russian tanks like storming across the frozen ground, right? So we go into work the next morning. Everyone's freaking out, pulling their hair out, and I was like, the international community is gonna fuck this up. Like, we're all, if everyone's as discombobulated as we are right now, we're fucked. You know what I mean? And the Ukrainians are real fucked. So then over the next 48 hours I don't know if you remember that period, but the news story wasn't Russia invades Ukraine. The news story was like, holy shit, the Ukrainians are fighting back and winning. And all these videos were coming out of like 20-year-olds with javelins, like blowing up Russian tanks and stuff. And everyone was just stunned. And, that's when I had already come to terms with, like, I had been wrong about my initial judgment of Rick Dick as being an 80-year-old Ned Flanders or whatever. I had already accepted I was wrong about that. Rick Dick is right. And then I was watching these videos like, holy shit, was Rick Dick right? Like, like they were doing exactly what like leadership courses in the CAF teach you to do. You know what I mean? It's like, seize the initiative. You know what I mean? Like, get out there. Like, don't let even if the adversary is going to take your position, like, don't just give it to him. You know what I mean? Like, you got to make him bleed for it, And they were doing all this like low level, small unit tactics stuff so well. Everyone was like freaking out. And I was like studying it going like, okay, we're above the threshold now. All that cyber IO psyop shit, that's all below the threshold of armed conflict stuff that you worry about. These guys have accepted they're above the threshold. You know what I mean? So that on the weekend, I went to my friend Lee's house and we were sitting in his basement and we literally hours. We had notepads out, laptops. We were like, how can Canada support Ukraine still? Like, how can we do some kind of remote training mission, or like, can we get PAMs translated to get to them about like the firing characteristics of different artillery shells and all this? And we were just like we were drinking a lot of beer too. And like, dude, we were up till like the middle of the fucking night, trying to figure out like, that was like Saturday. Right. And at the end of the night, we were like super jazzed about all the great ideas we had come up with. But I remember we were sitting there and we're like, they're not like, the CAF's not going to do any of this. Going to get it. Right. So then the next day I'm at home and in the evening, Zelensky went on TV and announced, they're on social media and announced the creation of the Legion. And it took me about 30 seconds.
What is the Legion? Can you just explain it?
The International Legion for the Defense of Ukraine. So it's foreign fighters fighting for Ukraine.
Could you argue that this is like their version of so this is their Foreign Legion? Yeah,
it's not a monolithic entity. Like, when you join the Legion, you're more sort of joining an idea more than an administrative cohesive unit. So there is a bunch of different legions. Like, there's a bunch of different units. So GUR, which is Ukrainian Military Intelligence, or HUR, if you want to sometimes pronounce it, they run what is the I can't believe I'm going to say this, but like administratively the most effective mechanism to join the Ukrainian fight, like officially. Like I had a Ukrainian military ID. I had, I had a service number and everything. There are other units too, though, like the ZSU, which is the army. So if you imagine like their defense intelligence and their army, they both report to the Minister of Defense, but it's kind of like they are separate branches, technically, right? So
each of them are responsible for recruiting, administering,
their own guys,
equipping,
exactly, yeah. So, and then you also, like you mentioned earlier, there's also like border guards, different police forces, which are basically paramilitary. Like, there are all these different organizations, so they're not as organizationally monolithic as just calling it the International Legion would make it seem. Also, there's Ukrainian units that will just hire foreigners, right? So if you show up and you meet a Ukrainian brigade, and you can get through the language barrier and stuff, they'll actually hire you directly, like, to their unit.
Whatever, describing it as like this melting pot of militias?
Yeah, so it's a lot more like the situation. It's changing now because the war's forcing them to
be more structured,
become more bureaucratic and structured. But honestly, dude, 2022 was a lot more similar to the way European countries used to fight each other like 500 years ago. Like some rich British guy would just be like, oh, there's a war on. I'm going to get together all the boys and we're going to call ourselves a regiment. And you know what I mean? And and they fund themselves and they go off in there. They are like a militia unit, but you'll hear a lot of brigades called separate assault brigades, like 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, or that means they basically aren't in any real chain of command. Right? Because it was like when the war started, or even in 2014, there was just a bunch of people in Eastern Ukraine that got together and called themselves a unit and started training, and, and it got formalized over time, right? So like the Azov Regiment, which is still controversial, but like they are amazing fighters. Like they're very organized. Like they're very, very organized. They weren't official for a very long time. You know what I mean? Like they were much closer to like freedom fighter insurgents than they were to like a professionalized military force that answered legally to a chain of command.
Right.
That's changing rapidly. In 3 years, it's changed considerably.
It's been more legitimized.
Yes. Yeah. And also just the reality of war is, war is not won by small teams.
Yeah.
Right? It's won by brigades, divisions. It's won by ops and plans, at the high strategic level. That's how you win a war. Just because you can get 30 dudes together and call yourselves a battalion, you know what I mean? Like you might do good work. That doesn't mean you're going to win operational level objectives.
But essentially there needs to be a vision.
Yeah.
And like a way to achieve that vision, which is equally as important as the skill of the people on the ground to make it happen.
Yeah, I would say it's more important.
Yeah.
Because gunfighters hate to hear this, but like, shooters don't win wars, right? Like if you're in the wrong place on the front, doing the wrong thing at the wrong time, it doesn't matter how good you are. You know what I mean? And I say this like I was a frontline, like I was just a dude. Like I was just a guy, walking around in the woods, and I was often doing stuff. I was like, I'm not really sure why we're doing this. I'm going to try my hardest, you know what I mean? But, last summer, we all went to Kharkiv because we thought that's where the Russian push was going to be that summer, because Putin was really signaling it, right? They said they want to make Kharkiv a sanitary zone. And we were getting all geared up to go to Kharkiv and push them back across the border. And that's what we did all summer. But then the Ukrainians wanted to derail that Russian narrative of like, this is inevitable. Like our victory here, there's nothing you can do about it. We're basically going to turn Kharkiv into the new international border. The Ukrainians were like, well, we need to derail that narrative entirely. So they went to Kursk, right? They sent 10,000 dudes across the border into Kursk to basically nullify Russian advances elsewhere, right? So now we thought we were going to be the main show all summer, and really we were the sideshow. You know what I mean? Like we're just the one. It's like, okay, just keep doing what you're doing. We're really worried about what's over here, right? If you're a gunfighter on that front, you're like, well, but I'm winning the war myself here. It's like, no, you're kind of just, you're the delightful sideshow. You know what I mean? it doesn't mean that you should not take your shoot, move, and communicate seriously, or that nav doesn't matter, or that the Russians aren't going to kill you if you don't put your NVG on at night. You know what I mean? They are. But it just means you're not the strategic level.
Like you're part of a feint.
Yeah,
and you can actually die in a feint.
Yeah.
Whether you actually physically understand that that's what's happening layers above your tactical plan. Yeah. But you're part of the feint, and like you could literally just die. Yeah. In this situation.
Yeah.
But yeah, I totally get it.
Yeah.
How do you get involved with these guys?
Well, so what happened was I emailed the Ukrainian embassy, and I was like, how do I join the Legion?
Tell Rick.
I went into work. So you got to remember, in that moment, everything was still emergency. Like, we were in nonstop meetings, all planning groups all day, every day. My boss and I are meeting at his house to have our own meeting on the weekend. So I went into work the next day on Monday, and all I had done was send an email. I was like, "Dear Ukrainian Embassy, like, how do I join the Legion?" Right? And I went in and I was, I did tell people, like I told Lee and I told my coworkers and stuff, but nobody was focused on what Dave Smith's doing. Everybody's worried about this war that's going on, and is it going to go nuclear? And then people, you got to remember, those days we weren't sure, is the U.S. going to send a force to Ukraine? Like, that was still something on the table. It was imaginable, right?
Right.
Is NATO going to close the skies and set up an air defense bubble over Ukraine? That was in the cards too. Like, nobody knew if any of this stuff was going to happen. So the Ukrainian embassy got hacked. So I didn't actually hear back from them for like 2 to 3 weeks. In that time, the international community was panicking and stuff was happening, but the U.S. had deployed 18 Airborne Corps to Germany as a corps level headquarters, with the task of, like, originally their task was, I think their only task was to help evacuate U.S. citizens from Ukraine. But they were basically, they're called the contingency corps. So it's basically like a corps level headquarters. So for anyone that's not familiar, corps is like one level above division, right? So they're like a corps level headquarters, but not a corps, just a corps level headquarters. That anytime something happens in the world where it looks like the U.S. might have to have a military response, they get thrown into that theater and set up shop and be ready for forces to flow through under them, right? So it's like you instantly have a command node on the ground.
That's like, it's like the concept of one div, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't really have formations, tactical formations under it.
It's like the concept of one div. It's not the practice.
Right.
Yeah. But yes, yeah. So the idea is, it's like a headquarters that you can deploy, and when I say rapidly, man, I think the dudes I was working with, I think they had like 36 hours notice or something, and they deploy before the invasion.
The Americans, they don't play,
dude. They don't fuck around, man. Like the whole corps headquarters, which is like hundreds of people.
Yo, man, I read this article.
Got like phone calls.
Yeah.
Like, hey, you're leaving tomorrow. You
know
what I mean? So they go to Germany. Yeah.
Man, I read an article, and it was about the Americans trying to understand, like, the concept of deploying a division across the water to Europe. Yeah. And they're like, well, can we do this? Like, can we do this in an efficient manner? Well, let's test it out. And then the next week, a division is being mobilized to move across Europe.
There,
just to test the concept.
I know, it's nuts.
Yeah.
So it is. So they communicate it as test the concept, but you got to remember, that's also strategic communication, because when you move a force that large around the globe, like Xi Jinping's getting briefed on it that much.
Oh yeah,
right. Like Vladimir Putin.
That's a formidable force.
Yes, it's you're communicating to your adversary. Like, by the way, we can move everything good. We can move this many people and all their equipment and be ready to fight you this quickly if we want to. You know what I mean? So it is a proof of concept mission, but the strategic communications piece is the real mission. The same reason, like, Putin was doing the buildup in April of 2021. You know what I mean? Putin had been signaling this invasion was coming for years. And I would argue that because there's so many people who, myself included, over the years, were treating him like an irrational actor, not realizing, like, from his perspective, his strategic decision to invade was the right one, right? Because think about how many wars Russia's had. They had the two Chechen wars in the 90s. They had the response to the terrorist attacks that brought Putin to power, which were hopelessly brutal and basically like a paramilitary level operation. You had Georgia, you had Syria, you had Ukraine the first time, right? And in every case, we did nothing. So anyways, it's the end of February. I said I'll join the Legion. I did eventually have some back and forth with the embassy after like a few weeks, but it was very slow moving, and they didn't have a process together, and their website kept getting hacked. And they had like a million things, right? Like when I show up at the embassy's around the corner from my house, I'd show up there and be like, "Hi, can I talk to the military attaché or whatever?" They're like, "We're busy." Yeah, you know. So in that time, my boss and a couple other like majors went to Europe to see what Team America at leading the international community was doing, to figure out like how we could support. And super important thing, the mandate for the Ukraine mission got refreshed. So when the week the invasion started, the government came out and said, we're renewing the MC for Off Unifier to reinforce our support for Ukraine and Ukrainians and Ukrainian sovereignty.
Even the Army strategic policy got scrapped. Because I was in Gagetown at the infantry school doing my DFS commander's course. Okay. So direct fire support. Yeah. And while we were there, like this is like a month or two after the invasion. Yeah. And this hot news, right? Yeah. Anti-armor warfare. Right?
Yeah, dude. Yeah. Huge.
And so, where I'm at, just so everybody understands, like I'm at the mecca of anti-armor, like at the school. Yeah. And so at an institutional concept. Yeah. So, and where I'm at, you got these people in key positions that are now getting spooled up to go to Ottawa. To go have these now new emergency conferences. Yeah. They might have been because the strategic policy now needs to be readdressed. Yeah. Or addressed again. Yeah. And
also at that time there was like a huge demand signal for, experts where I was, because people, like Rick and the other policy advisors needed to know like what equipment could we send, or what training could we do remotely, or what, you know what I mean? Like how could we help? So we were like, everybody was convulsing, trying to figure out what to do.
Like what was going on in your head? Like to go and to basically sever the umbilical cord with the military you're currently serving with, to go across the world, to go and join up with another military. It's a pretty big thing to do.
I didn't actually end up going right then though. So yeah, that was going through my head.
But even the decision making of it.
Yeah. But what happened, I'll tell you what really pushed me over, because it was a big decision and it was hard. And I knew eventually I'd have to tell my wife, and
like that's a whole big deal too, right?
Like, and also, people were talking to me like but you got to remember how surreal that time was. Like it was still COVID. You know what I mean? Like shit was getting bad. And so it was kind of this surreal moment for everybody. So I think when I, went into work the next day and told my friends, like, I emailed the embassy to ask how to join the Legion, they were all just like, oh, there's another surreal thing that's happening. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it was, it wasn't like the background context was completely calm and rational. You know what I mean? And then what happened was I didn't end up going right then because I got deployed, right? So my boss and a couple other Canadian Army officers CJOC officers went to Germany to find out what 18 Airborne Corps was doing. They saw what they were doing, and they were trying to figure out what type of... There's a huge draw for artillery officers at that time because we were sending the M777s. So like I forget exactly when it was announced, but it was in that time frame when they were there. The donated M777s had just been announced by Canada, the US, and a bunch of other countries. So they were setting up training in Latvia to train the Ukrainians on how to use M777s, and they needed, people to advise the Ukrainians on like the operational level planning for artillery and stuff like that. So they were like, oh, okay. They actually left an artillery officer there. His name's also Dave, my friend Dave Wilson. So Lee left with I think it was Dave and one other guy. And he literally just left Dave Wilson there. Dave Wilson thought he was going for like a week-long recce, basically, living in a hotel or whatever. And he gets there and Lee's like, you're deployed now. Stay here. And he was there for
so jokes.
Bro, 100%.
Astronauts that went up to space and they're like, hey, you're going to be back in a week.
Yeah.
You get left there for 8 months.
Yeah. Dude, I remember getting there. I remember texting before I went, texting him and being like, you need me to bring anything? And he's like, dude, I don't even have like enough socks to do this. He was there for like 2.5 months. Yeah. And he became like a kind of an expert on what was happening there. He was basically writing like a thesis to send it back to Canada. And, but anyway, so one of the things they asked for was an IO planner. And, because I had become this like default IO guy because nobody knew what cyber is about data. They're like, IO sounds cybery. Send Dave. and I was really trying to own it by that point. I was like, I really wanted to contribute. Like I had a team of, just like genius misfits, like reservists with 2 master's degrees that spoke multiple languages. We had all these really smart, brainy people. And I was just trying to figure out like, how could we defend the free world with all of this brain power through, smartphones basically.
Yeah.
And so my Colonel Smith, he just pulled me into his office on like a Friday in May, I think. And he's like, could you deploy Monday? And I was like, yeah, I guess. But I mean, because I knew what they were asking for. I had seen all the emails and everything. They wanted an IO planner. And I was like, first of all, I'm still planning on joining the Legion. I'm working it out. And I think there's people more qualified than me or whatever, but he was like, him and Lee, my friend / boss, they're like, we know you're the guy. We know what the Americans are doing there. And we know how they want us to help. And we know you're the guy to go help. And plus, it didn't mean I couldn't join it. Like I wasn't going to be there forever. I was going to go for as long as it ended up being. And then we would hopefully regularize it and send somebody after me. Because I actually recommended they send one of the captains that worked for me, who ended up going after me. And so I went to Germany, is in 18th Airborne Corps headquarters, working for General Chris Donahue, just like an absolute, like, historical figure. Is one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. And their mission was not clear to anyone when they got there. When I got there, it was changing all the time because, as the contingency corps or the rapid reaction corps or whatever you want to call them, they're thrown out the door and it's like, the government's going to need you for something. So be ready. Right. Then they got a couple Ukrainian liaison officers there and they're figuring out how to support them, how to train them on, the M777. And then shortly, about a month after I got there was when they got HIMARS. So there's a lot of moving pieces. Like, how do you get the equipment into Ukraine? How do you train them on how to use the equipment? How do they
how do you sustain it?
How do you sustain it? And like, huge thing, how do you make sure they don't lose it? Because the strategic value to Russia of taking out NATO equipment in Ukraine is huge, right?
How are you going to replace it, right?
Yeah. And just like the strategic value of saying like Russia's fighting NATO in Ukraine, which is the narrative Vlad wants, you know what I mean? So there was a lot of that going on. And then in the background, there was me and 2 other targeting majors there that were, we had authorities from the new mandate for the mission to do intelligence sharing with the Ukrainians, and that's what we were doing. And we're trying to help them solve like tactical and low-level operational problem sets. So they'd be like, hey, there's some kind of EW something that's fucking destroying all of our drones in this sector of the front, and we don't know how to find it.
So are you in a military, are you like in a CAF position right now?
Me, no. I'm just an unemployed civilian. I'm a stay-at-home dog dad.
No, I'm sorry. Like in this.
Yeah. I was still in the
uniform.
CAF. I was deployed. Like a colonel brought me into his office, said, "Can you deploy?" And I was like, "Yes," and they deployed me.
So you're in Germany right now?
Germany. This is like the spring of 2022, and I was there till November. I think I got there the last week of May or the first week of June.
Was this considered op unifier?
Yes, technically, yeah. So Dave Wilson, when he got deployed, he was just on like TD. He was just like on a recce, but it was so mission critical that he stay there that I don't know how they eventually got it that he was supporting op unifier or whatever. But I had an actual op unifier CFTPO. So get over there, doing the business, and I'm with all these cool capabilities in the Americans G39 shop, which for those who don't know, G3 is ops, and then G39 is like all of your like IO space, other stuff that people don't understand shop, including the soft PsyOps guys who were there. They were dope. And
you're part of the G39 shop?
Yeah, I was in there. I was like embedded in the American G39 shop. I worked for an American colonel named Sean Heigerk, and he's the guy that requested somebody come over there. And when I met him, I was like, this guy is dope. He's like It's just the like nicest, politest, most professional like American colonel or whatever. And he was like, yeah, when they said the Canadians wanted to help out, I was like, I want one. Get him. If you got an IO guy, get him over here, you know.
Give me a Canadian.
Yeah. Because they really did, you know, the Americans, but also the Brits and anyone, like they really, at least the army guys that I worked with, they really wanted this to be an international thing. Like they didn't want it to be, you know, like Iraq or Afghanistan or something where it's like the Americans kind of need the optics of but they're going to do it anyways.
Yeah,
you know
yeah.
I mean? Because their administration also was just as fucking
tiptoeing.
You know what I mean? Like, dude, sending like I call it policy by platform. It was like they would give the Ukrainians something like try javelins and then we'll see how that goes. It's
right.
Like, okay, M777s and then
don't shoot it in the other country. Just shoot it in your own for now. Yeah.
So they were like this was not Team America World Police from 2005, right? Like they're really, at least the military guys, they were like, we need everyone on the, you know what I mean? Like we really need this to be an international response, you know? And the Brits even more so. Like the Brits are even more. Let's all hold hands and work together. And so you know, I got over there. And I was working the G39, and I still really wasn't sure what my role was gonna be. But we ended up doing like POI, point of interest development for that's essentially what most of the ops floor was doing because it's not our op, right? We're just
is that essentially targeting.
So targeting has a targeting cycle where you're like deciding what is the behavior you want to change in your strategic adversary, what is the audience that could change that behavior, how do you target that audience, right? I'm using PsyOps terms, but like in military terms, it'd be like, you know, we want to change their behavior, which is get the Russians out of eastern Ukraine. Well, how can you do that? The Ukrainians have to come up with that. Like they're like, I don't know if they have a targeting cycle, I doubt it, but or they didn't at that time, but like they're the ones that have to decide like strategically how are they going to fight this fight. If you remember in the early, like right the week before the war, right, when the Biden administration was declassifying shit that in the past they would have never declassified, that's what that was. Like they were trying to get information that typically only American decision makers would have out into the information environment, especially into Ukraine, so that the people who were at risk of being invaded or whatever could make the better decisions. You know what I mean? And I don't often say nice things about the Biden administration, but like that was the right call to make, right? Like there was the foreign disclosure officers or whoever it was that like looks at intelligence and says, yeah, you can give that to this country, but not that country. You can't give it to them, right? I'm sure they were all like, sir, you cannot go on the news and announce this shit. You know what I mean? And you know, they did, and then General Donahue, when we were in Germany, man, like he was determined. I've never met a guy that there will be movies about this dude. You know what I mean? Like Brad Pitt will play him in the movie or something. Man, he was like, if you can get a piece of information to the Ukrainians, do it. You know what I mean? So we couldn't expose sources and methods, and you had to go through all the rigmarole that normally goes into intelligence sharing. But if we could distill it down to like, here's a grid, here's the thing we saw, and here's the time that it was seen, they would do their best to get it to the Ukrainians. You know what I mean? Which often doesn't help them contextually, right? Like, but it at least tells them like, you know, this is the EW thing that's jamming your drones. Yeah, you know what I mean. So what I ended up doing, because you know we're Canada and I didn't have a ton of kind of assets to play with or whatever, but I ended up using like all publicly available information because the Russians were posting everything on social media. Like I would leave the ops floor and just go scroll my phone. Like a Gen Z kid, you know what I mean? No offense to the Gen Zs, but I was like literally outside the thing looking through fucking Telegram being like, wait a minute. And then I would screen grab it, email it to myself back in the operational office, go back in through security and sit down on my desk and be like, I'm sure they could use this. Like, you know what I mean? Because you can geolocate things and you can, you know what I mean? You can piece together which units are where, and you know, the conscripts would be like getting hammered outside the bus that they're about to get on and go to their death, and like shooting selfies and putting it on like VContact and stuff. VContact leaves all the metadata on the VContact is like Russian Facebook. It leaves all the metadata on the pictures because that way it's easier for the Russians to spy on you. So I didn't even have to do a lot of work. I would just click the picture and it would have the grid of where it was.
Wow.
You know what I mean? So we turned this into like a conveyor belt, and eventually Britain sent some OSINT analysts, like these two kids in their early 20s that were just amazing at that. Like I had the idea. They were like amazing at it. And then eventually we started working with these two Belgian guys who, like, the stuff I had just discovered, they had turned into like a massive factory, basically, of POI development. So, we were getting all these like international partners together and such. But like, I felt like it was only the military people that got it. Long story short, I went on this deployment. We were doing a lot to help the Ukrainians, and I thought it was great. But I came home so disgusted by the international community's response, including my own country, that like when I went back into work in November, I got home like November 4th or 5th, and then the next day I just went into the colonel's office and I was like, sir, I won't be here in the spring.
Bro, you just came back from like being one of the closest guys from the military side of being so embedded into the, like, I don't know how to describe it, like the invasion. Without physically being there.
We were watching it. It was so infuriating. Like, we were watching, and like everyone that came out and saw what they were doing was just blown away. Like everybody, like it had this startup mentality quality to it. And the Ukrainians were like, I didn't get to work super closely with them, but we were advising them. We're helping them with planning. We were having whiteboarding sessions. We were like, they were like real, and I was like meeting them, and they were like, okay, I'm going back to Ukraine now. They're going to fight and die. You know what I mean? So when I got home, I was just like, I can't, like, just go back to being a staff officer in Ottawa? No, man. So I got through Christmas leave. I started, because at this point I knew lots of people in Ukraine. I just started phoning around to like contacts that I had, like, anyone in this Legion? And a British guy that I knew was like, yeah, my friend, he's a former intelligence officer. He's there right now. I just contacted that guy. And then I started meeting everybody through Signal. And then I just, I submitted my release, and I released on March 31st of 2023.
Were you accepted by that point by them? You got a legit offer of employment?
I was going to be S3 for one of the units in Bakhmut. Yeah. Like I hadn't, like, you can't join until you're there. You have to be like in person to join. Right. But I knew where I was going. I knew who I'd be working with and whatever, or I thought I did. And then when I got there, it was a discombobulated shit.
Yo, let's back this up. What'd you tell your wife?
No, she knew. I was like, while I was emailing the Legion a year earlier, I was like, I'm emailing the embassy.
She knew your intentions.
Yeah. It was hard. Yeah. That's an entire story in itself. If anybody watching this, if your wife ever meets my wife and complains about you going to Wainwright for farm exercise or something, May will kill you.
She cannot empathize with you anymore. She's on another level.
She'll lose her goddamn mind. Love you, baby. But yeah, so I got over there. Like I said, you're not joining a monolithic entity. It's not like they have you kind of got to get hired by a team at this point because it still wasn't very developed yet. But I was there. I immediately encountered a team I did not want to join because on my fourth day, I got blown up by an Iskander in the basement of a fucking building because of a piss poor command decision. I was like, I'm not going to work for these guys. These guys suck. So anyways, I still didn't have a contract because it took me a few weeks to get my contract and my ID and everything. So I went back to Kyiv to wait to get my contract and my weapon. And, I was like asking around, I was meeting people, having like coffee dates with people that I had met through Signal and stuff. And I had heard there was a Belarusian unit in the Legion. And I like immediately...
Is the Legion like a brigade? You could think of it like a brigade?
It's amorphous. Like it's...
Right.
Yeah. And the numbers, I don't want to speculate on numbers now, but they're low now. Like it's getting smaller as the war goes on. Because there's just like everyone that's going to volunteer at this point has probably gone and volunteered, right? So I had heard there's a Belarusian unit, and I knew a lot more about Belarus than the average person because of my old job. And I was like, these guys, they won't just be like, because war attracts a lot of riffraff. There's a lot of like mercenary types, and there's a lot of kind of just adrenaline junkies and people that are running away from stuff. So there's a lot of like shifty characters in the foreign fighter community. Not to say there isn't a lot of like of the best soldiers that I ever worked with as well, but there's a lot you don't know when you're meeting them, right? But I knew anyone that defected from Belarus to go fight for Ukraine against the Russian army is like, these guys are going to be committed. You know what I mean? Even if they're not good soldiers, like I know they're going to be like philosophically aligned with me, right? Or I'm going to be philosophically aligned with them. So I met this Serbian American dude. I was just living in a flat with some other foreigners, waiting for my Legion paperwork to go through, and we had been talking about different teams and units to join or whatever, and he had already cycled through the country a couple of times because he was living in somewhere in Eastern Europe at the point. I forget where. Bulgaria, I think.
My bad. When did you get there?
I got there April 15th of 2023.
Okay, so over a year after the invasion now.
Yeah.
Okay. So things have been going on.
Well, yeah, stuff's happening. The Legion's up and running. There's teams. So he had gone home, to see his family and do some stuff or whatever, and then come back a couple of times. And he was in this flat with me, this apartment, waiting for his paperwork. And I mentioned to him, I was like, yeah, like that team that I thought I was going to join, they were not good. And I almost got blown up on my 4th day because their commander made a stupid decision. And I was like, I'm not going to join them. He's like, that's a good call. I was like, do you know anything about this Belarusian unit? And he's like, actually, keep this under your hat, but I'm hopefully joining them. I'm going to go meet with them right now. He spoke some Russian, so he actually had like a leg up on me. But he told me, he's like, the dudes that I'm working with, if you're a former NATO, they don't typically hire foreigners. Like they're pretty monolithic, right? All Belarusians and some Russians and a couple of Ukrainians. But they haven't hired any Westerners yet. And he was the first sort of Westerner because he's Serbian American. And I was like, oh, okay. But he was like, if you're a former NATO major, they will probably be very interested to talk to you. Because they want to be like, they want to know how to do combined arms operations, and they want to like, they're trying really hard to professionalize as an actual like regiment. And I was like, okay. So we went and met them, and their commanders at the time, I met 2 or 3 of them at once. Like, it was not a hard conversation. Like, it was all through translator.
Yeah.
But they, like I didn't have to explain to them why I wanted to fight.
Right.
The fact that I knew anything about the revolution in 2020, I think just spoke to, they were just like, okay, we trust you. If you can prove you were like a NATO officer and you know something about our, recent political history, that, they were on board with the idea. And then, dude, it's just like that meeting happened on like a Tuesday or a Wednesday. They got my contract sorted out right away. By like Thursday, I drove to Donbass, and then the next day I was on a range with their team, their infantry team that was there. And then on like the day after that, I was in a trench outside Bakhmut, next to this little town called Klishchivka.
So what was your job? What was your initial task?
The first few missions, dude, I was literally just like soldier. Like they didn't even really know because they didn't even know how to organize a force.
Rifleman number 1?
We were a machine gun squad, technically,
Okay.
because we had tons of machine guns, PKMs and 7.62s and I think we had a 50 cal in that position. So we were like technically a machine gun squad, but we're just light infantry, man. Like I got there and they're like, do you know how to dig a trench? And I was like, yes, I know how to dig a trench. They're like, okay, off you go. And I can show you pictures of it. I wanted to hire a realtor to show this thing by the end of the week, man. It was fucking the most beautiful trench you've ever seen. They love overhead protection. I hid under my own overhead protection as white phosphorus was coming down. That was on my like 2nd or 3rd op or whatever. But I was like, this is exactly the way the sergeant majors said it would be in 2008. You know what I mean? Like, I remember so many exercises in like Gagetown and Wainwright and shit being like, this sucks. But like, we just thought it was stupid.
Yeah.
We were like, we're going to be fighting terrorists and counterinsurgency for our whole
What
careers.
the fuck am I in a trench?
Why are we assaulting Russian trench systems? What is this, the Cold War? And all the old guys, the who are now like, MWOs and chief warrant officers, you know, they would like literally have to tell her, it was like, shut up. Like, this is your job. Like all that other stuff. Yes, you'll learn how to do it. Or this, you have to know how to do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they were right, and I was wrong. You know what I mean?
So you're embedded with the platoon.
Mm-hmm.
We
were smaller than a platoon. Dude, I mean, it changed over time, right? So I did 4 combat rotations. I did.
What's a rotation? 30 days? Like,
it's actually pretty elastic. Like, it's the situation dictates.
Okay.
My first one came to an abrupt end because Prigozhin had his insurrection. And if you remember, when the dust on that all settled, he was supposed to be going to Belarus, right? With a bunch of Wagner dudes. So my unit obviously wanted to move up closer to the border because we were way down in Donbass at that time. So the Ukrainians actually pulled us off the line right away, and we went and spent the rest of the summer up closer to the border. But it was kind of like our C team fighting their C team. It wasn't real. It was a rotation technically, but it was all like drones and mortars, and it wasn't what you would think of as like maneuver warfare the way it was down in Donbass. Because like in Donbass, that's where we were when the counteroffensive started. So my big goal was to get there before the counteroffensive started, because like at that time we actually thought we had a chance to win, right? Like when I got to Ukraine, like people were like, okay, this summer, that's it, it's on, we got tanks, let's go do this. And then it dragged on and on and on and on. It didn't start till June 4th. But I was in Donbass with the 3rd Assault Brigade. We actually secured their line of departure the night of the like 3rd, 4th, and then on the 4th they fucking roared across this canal and started the counteroffensive. So that was dope. That was a highlight of my career. Then we went up north. It was kind of lame.
And what was that like, man?
What's that?
Like being part of a campaign, like,
dude, it's like it's
insane.
No, it's exactly the way they told me it would be. It is literally just, it's like, no, like we infilled at night. You know what I mean? We prepared a position. We thought, you know, they were the Ukrainian brigade was sorting itself out. My team, me and the other Westerner that joined with me, we went to our, you know, Belarusian team leader, who's one of my best friends. His name's Sonya. He's dope. And we were like, dude, there's no Russians in front of it. Like, you know what I mean? We've been doing spec fire. We've been firing RPGs at it. There's no Russians there. Let's move up. And he was like, okay, well, hang on. And he, I think he actually went to the Ukrainian brigade commander, because he left the position for like half a day, came back and was like, yeah, tomorrow morning they want us to advance. Because if you can push the line of departure further into, if we can move the line of departure further forward, it's less that the brigade actually has to do traveling. You know what I mean? They can just roar up there and go. So, dude, that next morning, we walked through like 800 or 900 meters of forest, and like the Russian positions had like just been abandoned. It was like out of a movie. Like the food was still warm and shit. Oh, shit. Oh, you could tell Yo,
were you scared? Were you anxious?
When we first went, when we first stepped off in the woods, it felt like remarkably familiar. Yeah. Right? It felt like being on my dismounted platoon commander course. Like we're getting all gunned up. We got our fucking, make sure you're ready. Make sure you got your grenades accessible, blah, 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 blah. But there was no, so I don't want to make it sound like we had a big gunfight or anything. It was like we were walking, and the Russians clearly had known that something was coming, because they're like position after position was just abandoned.
Was it creepy?
It was creepy as fuck, dude.
Because you're in the
all
woods,
over the place, and they're messy as fuck. Like no discipline whatsoever. Right, the Ukrainian positions, like the good brigades, like 3rd Assault Brigade I was with, they have like trash collection and a track plan, and like they're quite. They develop their trenches like considerably while they're there. The Russians, because none of them want to be there, they're all conscripts, right? They just like
it shows in their behavior.
Fucking everywhere, shit everywhere, like just fucking horrible. Yeah,
that's very interesting.
Yeah. And so they had yard sailed all kinds of equipment and stuff. There was just shit everywhere. And so we moved like 800 or 900 meters forward, and then we dug in that night, and we were like, we got it right up to this canal, which was like a natural barrier. So we're like, okay, we'll stop here. We'd secured up to the canal, and this is where they'll start the counteroffensive. And then the next day, boom, off they went. It was June 4th. And so then that's what we were doing for the first half of the summer. Then we went up north to sort of like the intersection of the Belarusian-Russian-Ukrainian border, but we weren't doing any like real fighting up there. As like drones and mortars and stuff, and we weren't there long. I was not there long at all. And then I got called back to Kyiv to start doing more of an officer role. I was like doing planning and stuff, because the regiment was trying to figure out like which part of the sector are we gonna go to next? Like where's the fall fight gonna be? So I went back for that. We thought we were going back to Donbass. So I went back to Kramatorsk, where I was living in a flat with another Canadian in a different Legion unit. And we thought that's where the fight was going to be. Then once the fall started, we got called north to Kupiansk, which is on like the east side of Kharkiv Oblast, is much further north. And then we were in Kupiansk for like a while. Like we were there from like end of September, beginning of October till like right up before Christmas. And we were there for like the transition from the fall to the winter, and it was just like being engaged down. It was like muddy as fuck, and then it all froze and is miserable.
Some fucking hard conditions.
Yeah, it was hard conditions, but it was all defense. So it did suck. Like, you know, we were constantly running out of mortar rounds and stuff. And the weight of fire from the Russians is like incredible. Like, you think, why would they waste so much ammo on like 2 dudes in a trench with 1 machine gun? They will just rain it down on you all day. You know what I mean? Like, it's just unbelievable how many rounds they'll throw at a position nonstop for like nothing to show, you know? So defense in the winter sucked. I don't want to make it sound like I did a few missions on that rotation, but I was mostly in the talk, because by that point, all the Legion units were trying to work together. So we had like a joint talk. And it went really well. There was me, and one of the other Legion units had kind of a guy like me named Ned. He's British. And we were we were basically the S3s running the talk together. And we had a Ukrainian fires officer from the Ukrainian artillery brigade that was there. We had our own drone guys, our own mortar guys, our own medical evac, our own QRF, you know what I mean? And all the different units were like working together. There was probably 3 or 4 units operating out of this talk. So I spent most of that rotation doing that. And it was literally like a kind of like a senior captain, junior major.
How did you feel now, like at this point in like your service in Ukraine?
I mean, it's frustrating, it's hard, and I'm leaving out a lot of the like personal dynamic shit, right? Because there's like mutinies all the time. There's teams that just fall apart. There's it's hard. It's really one day I want to write a book called Soft Skills for Hard Fucks, and it'll just be like all of the soft skill stuff I learned being an infantry officer, like. Because I know you guys have been around a while. You've probably seen some people are better at it than others. But like when you're a junior lieutenant and you show up in battalion, the first thing that happens is they're like, okay, here's 30, 35 dudes who all hate each other, and they all hate you, and you got to make them all work together. You know what I mean? And, you know, oh, and by the way, like your senior NCOs know more. They've forgotten more about infantry than you learned in your year and a half in Gage Town or whatever. You know what I mean? And you have to like learn how to you know, subtly, you know, get people to work together and come up with a plan and make sure everybody feels included in the plan. And you know what I mean? And you still have to you still have to be in command, but you can't just be a dictator about everything. You know what I mean? Cause you know, if your dudes only do exactly what you tell them, nothing will work. You know what I mean? So I felt like there was a lot of that on that rotation. There was a lot of like, okay, how do we get all these units to work together, all these different cultures, all these different languages? You know, I'm in a Russian-speaking unit, you know what I mean? So they really liked having me as their guy in the talk, because most of the Legion grown-ups spoke English, you know what I mean? So even the Ukrainians spoke English. So when they were having their meetings with the other team leaders and stuff, you know, the few Belarusian team leaders that spoke English would be there, and I'd be there. Even if I didn't have a team, I was just there as like the kind of the officer role, you know what I mean? Then I went on leave. I went to the UK. My wife came in. My brother lives in London, so I went and stayed with him, and my wife came and met me there, and we spent some time together there. Then I actually went, and because I have like the Belarusians that I work with can't leave. Right, they're all defectors, right? So they don't have homes to go to. Right. So they're like stuck staying fighting till this war is over, and then they're going to go fight another war. I was actually able to go.
That's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
Like that's your life now,
dude. Yeah. Bro, I was a partisan in a revolutionary army. Like it was like I was like, I felt like I was in a history book the whole time. And you know, like all the Belarusians. Some of their backstories were just insane. You know what I mean? Like after they were arrested in the revolution and shit. And like I had a Belarusian roommate, Babus, who's like one of my closest friends. You know, so I was like really, really like embedded with him. So I was actually able to leave the country and go meet. I did like interviews with Free Belarusian media. I went and met a bunch of them in Poland. I met the chief of staff to the exiled government. So like Svetlana Tsikhanovskaya, who won the election in 2020, she got exiled, right? Like she had to flee the country. So I went and met a bunch of her staff and stuff. And I was just trying to like bring the military and political sides closer together and try to help them get like their narrative out into the English language world. Because I could do that. You know what I mean? Like none of the soldiers can leave Ukraine. So they're like, unless somebody will go to Ukraine to meet them, they're just kind of there being like, hey, we're Belarusian.
Yeah.
Right? So I went and did that for a while. So I was actually gone from Ukraine for like 2 months in the middle of it, between leave and doing all that stuff. Then I went back and we were getting way bigger and better and more professionalized. So as soon as I got back, we went on like a month-long hiring blitz because they were like, we want to get more Westerners.
What year is this? 2023?
2024. So I got back in like early March of 2024.
All right.
So, so last year. So I'm there. We did a bunch of hiring, recruiting, planning, team organizing, figuring out which part of the sector or which sector of the front we're going to next. Then we went and did like easily a month and a half of pre-deployment training, which is where I met the Canadian trained engineer guy. And the pre-deployment training was good, man. Like we were getting really good. We were coming, while I was gone, they had another strong rotation. So the Legion leadership was really starting to see like my regiment was really coming together. We were getting really good.
And what was your regiment called?
The Kaustis Kalinowski, the Kalinowski regiment.
The Kalinowski regiment.
So Kaustis Kalinowski was a Belarusian journalist in the 1860s, I want to say, but he was like a dissident journalist. Like he was politically murdered, I think, or executed, one or the other. But he's like a hero figure in their culture for resisting dictatorship, basically. So there, you often hear them called the PKK because that is the Belarusian acronym, but most people just call it the Kalinowski Regiment. So the regiment was getting quite good. We were hiring lots of people. We were getting trained up. We were very organized. We're coming off of like 2 or 3 really strong rotations. And we had proved that we could work with other units. We could work with the Ukrainian, like varying degrees of like the really, really good Ukrainian units and the not so good like National Guard units.
Yeah.
Proved that we could really work well with.
You guys had such a good capacity to be interoperable with a variety of highly skilled and lowly skilled.
Yeah. And I feel like,
which is important, right? Because the lowly skilled ones, I'd argue communication is so important.
Yeah.
And how to make it work.
And I think that there's a kind of a street cred the Belarusians have that other foreign fighters don't enjoy because everyone knows they can't leave. Like they made a huge, like my decision to go is
this is like some you're in prison for life mentality. Not leaving.
I don't know, like I wouldn't say prison because overwhelmingly the majority of them are like proud to be there.
I don't want to say prison, but I wanted to say like, hey, this is the environment.
Yeah. Forever.
This is your forever reality.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a better way of putting it.
No, but dude, it's hard, man. It's hard. And I was taught like 4 guys just got killed last week, and my Ukrainian commander got his leg blown off the week before that. Like it's fucking hard, dude.
Yeah,
like talking to my closest friends that are still there. Like it's just mentally, it's so hard, and they're quite frankly like afraid of what will happen if there's a ceasefire, right? Because they're refugees, right? They're displaced persons, right? So if the Legion stops existing or whatever, like where do they go? What do they do? What rights
do you have?
What rights do they have? Where are they going to get an income? Like
it's so fucked up. It's like
and
their safety and security right now is because of this conflict.
Yeah.
They have safety and security because of their role in this conflict.
I wouldn't even say no. It's just like, well, no, because they're at the front getting killed all the time.
Yeah, so you can't even say that.
Yeah. Their political legitimacy is because of the conflict, and they are former. Like in March of 2022, Zelensky did, like about a month after the fighting started. Like Zelensky had a big press conference where he acknowledged, like, yeah, they are a Belarusian regiment. In the Ukrainian chain of command, like we fight together. You know, we recognize what they're doing. So yeah, but it's politically very tenuous for them, and plus, you know, if they get injured, like they don't know if they're like, are they going to have a pension?
Yeah.
Probably not. Like it's really, really tough. And it's kind of like there's lots of Westerners. I'm sure you guys have heard stories. I don't like this narrative, but there's some truth to it. There's lots of Westerners that show up, go on one mission, experience Russian artillery for the first time, and they're like, "Fuck this, I'm out." You know what I mean? Well, they can't do that. You know what I mean? Like the military, like I could have gone home at any time if I wanted to. You know what I mean? They can't do that. You know what I mean? So the level of commitment is huge. You know, when you're fighting with a bunch of like partisan revolutionaries and Ukrainians who are being invaded, everyone in the room might disagree about how the problem should be solved, but everyone agreed there is a solution. You know what I mean? Like they will come up with a solution. The solution might be we all go out there and get killed, but like something's going to happen.
You're so invested.
You're so invested. Like, you know, just being surrounded by people who, even if they weren't like career soldiers and they weren't really sure what they were doing, just being surrounded by people who are like, we will get to a solution. Like there will be, like, how are we going to do an infill? Like there's too much drone coverage and we don't have vehicles. Like, what are we going to do? It's like, there will be a solution. Like someone will figure it out. You know what I mean? It might not go well. It might be fucking horrible. We might never do it ever again. You know what I mean? But there isn't that like defeatist mentality